As I've watched that video the past couple weeks, it's consistently brought me back to a race that I partook in January. And I've shared this before that in my life, I've never considered myself to be a runner until I discovered this thing called trail running. And I'm not a super competitive person, but it just checked a lot of boxes, and I grew to love trail running. And I signed up for a couple of races over the last few years just to kind of give me a goal to shoot for. And I think about that video, I go back to my race because this is what my race looked like back in January, one that I did recently. And it was just this beautiful area out in West Texas. And it was something that I trained for months, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, if I'm honest. And the race started at around 5 o'clock in the morning. And that doesn't sound fun. It's 35 degrees outside. It's January, middle of the desert. Doesn't sound very fun, but it was actually really cool because we all have our headlamps on, which headlamps just make you feel cool when you put a headlamp on. And we're running, and coffee's flowing, and everybody's cheering each other on as the race starts, and then we're off. And the first 2/3 of the race were just amazing because you're running with friends, and you're having a ton of fun. The sun is coming up. Yeah, I only take pictures like that when I'm running in beautiful areas. Otherwise, I'm not a selfie or a happy selfie kind of guy at all. But I do that because it was just so fun watching the sunrise. Running up into this mountain range, it was beautiful. And one of my favorite parts about these races, this is how you know I'm not a true athlete, is the aid stations that they have. They have these aid stations set up at certain points, and they are stocked with so much snacks and goodies and candy, all the bad stuff that fills you up with calories again. It's amazing. And one of my favorite things is you get up to the aid station, and then they've got these little tiny cups of pickle juice. I don't know about you, I love pickles. It's one of my favorite foods. And so I will literally, again, I'm not a great runner, I will literally motivate myself mentally knowing that the pickle juice shot is coming when I get to the thing. So I will go from aid station to aid station thinking, okay, just a little bit further, snacks, pickle juice is waiting for me. And I was doing this throughout the race. It was going great. The last chunk of the race was a little bit of a different story. Because it's one of those things where you come back through the finish line and then you go back out again onto a different route. And I looked at my watch and I was like, okay, I covered most of the elevation. It's getting a little hotter outside. It's the desert. It's about 85 degrees now. I'm kind of caked in salt and sweat. And at this point, I was like, okay, but I think according to my watch, it's going to be pretty smooth. And I just completely miscalculated. Because I started what felt like were desert stair steppers, just going up and down in this last stretch of the race. And I was completely alone, not another human being in sight for about 2 hours going through this part of the race because everybody was so separated at this point from the front and behind. And so for 2 hours, I was just out there. It felt like it about took my soul from me. I was bargaining with God as I'm getting through these different parts of the race. Finally, I turn back around and things start going back downhill, which means I'm going towards the finish line. And what brought my soul back to me was when I came through the finish line, or as I was getting close to it, one of my sons ran out to meet me. I didn't know if I was going to drop him at this point. I was so scared. But he went with me, and this is really fun. It's a really sweet moment. It's also one of those Instagram versus reality things because that looks like a sweet moment. What you don't know is that as we go through the finish line, after everything I've been through, zero regard for what I'd gone through, my son whispers in my ear and he says, "Daddy, can I have a snack?" I thought you were coming out to encourage me, but you just need something. So 90 seconds later, he's sitting down eating a bag of Cheetos, and he's so happy, and I'm still dying a little bit. But anyways, I share that for two reasons. One is if you ever sign up for anything like that, just triple check your calculations of vertical elevation change, all of that stuff. And as my wife likes to say, just hope for the best, but prepare for the worst out there. It's probably just a better way to manage your expectations. The second reason I share that, much more in line with where we're going today and relevant to where we're going today, is because as I think back to my experience in that race, and as I think back to my experience as a follower of Jesus and I observe the faith journey of others, that race for me is oddly symbolic of what it can look like to follow Jesus. We've been in this series the past couple of weeks called The Way of Jesus, really centering in on this one statement, this sentence that was uttered by what I believe to be the most influential man in history, that one day during his ministry, Jesus said this. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. This is such a radical statement because not only is Jesus saying, hey, if you want to get to God, I am the way in which you actually get into a relationship with God, but he's also alluding to the idea that we all have a way of approaching life. Like in all the different categories of life that we have, financial, with parenting, with relationships, spiritual, we all have a way of approaching those categories based on a truth or a reality or a mental map on how we see the world, right? And we do that hoping that we will get to a certain aspect of our life that is good, that we are hoping for. That you or I, we see the world a certain way, and we operate in our life in such a way that we hope it delivers the life that we ultimately want. Here's why this statement is so relevant to all of us, regardless of your faith background. Just think about this for a minute. Here is the most influential person in history, you could argue. And he claims to be God. And then he makes this statement. He says, we all have a way of doing life, but I actually am the root, the foundation of life. What we've been saying, kind of the bottom line of the series has been that in Jesus, we find the way, we discover the truth, and we experience the life that we were made for. And the invitation for all of us, regardless of if you're brand new to church or not, you are young or you're old, whether you think you're bad, you think you're good, wherever you are in life, the invitation for all of us, Jesus just says, follow me. To step into this life, to experience this fullness of life that he offers us. And last week we talked about how it gets kind of practical as we do that, right? And we discover, we follow, we know Jesus, and we implement these different practices. Today I want to talk about how we are to manage our expectations as we follow Jesus. When I ran that race back in January, I had a lot of expectations about how it was going to go. And really, I was thinking about the finish line. Like, here's the goal. This is what I want to get to, right? Like, I was thinking all about the benefits of what it was going to feel like, what it was going to be like, right? I had forgotten. I hit that mental, physical wall, and people told me this was going to happen. I guess I just didn't believe them, really. I had forgotten what it was going to cost me to get there. See, when it comes to following Jesus, we like to think a lot about the benefits. There are a lot of benefits to following Jesus, not just like existential benefits, like way, truth, and life kind of benefits, but what we've said for years is that we believe following Jesus actually makes your life better and makes you better at life. And this is true, even people who don't think he is God would agree with aspects of this. This is why people say, well, maybe he's just a moral teacher, because when you open the New Testament, regardless of religious experience or church experience, when you just open the New Testament and you read what Jesus has to say about finances or relationships or happiness or contentment, all of these things, when you open it up, what you recognize, and many people would agree with, he was spot on in life. And so there's a lot of benefits, but if you're like me, maybe you're like me, I'm a more glass half empty kind of person, and I like to think of myself, I say to my friends, well, I'm not glass half empty, I'm just a skeptical optimist. That's what I like to say. That's how I frame it. So maybe you relate with that or maybe not. But if you're like me, I always wonder, what's the catch? What's the catch? Like, it's so good, makes your life better, all that stuff. Well, what's the catch? What is this going to cost me? Because there is a cost associated with following Jesus. And we like to stay in the camp of the benefits, and we don't like to think much about the cost of following this man. The cost is really one of the most valid arguments or reasons I have ever heard against following Jesus. And here's what I mean by that. Buck, our senior pastor, he met with this guy for years in his office, and they'd have all these conversations. Really successful guy, an atheist, just didn't believe this stuff, but his family really liked coming to church. And they met, and they talked about all their questions and all the things, and they started to really drill down, and they answered question after question after question, until one day, the guy's meeting with Buck in his office, and he's just got down to another question. And then the guy just kind of goes, well, he just throws his hands up and goes, you know what? Well, Buck, I guess I just want to believe what I want to believe so that I can do what I want to do. That's such an honest response, because I think we don't like to think about the cost. How are we going to have to change our life? What are we going to have to do differently? What are we going to have to think about differently in our life, right? It's far easier to say, well, instead of having to change anything, I'm just going to choose to believe this instead. Honestly, I commend somebody who is that honest with their exploration of what it means to follow Jesus. At the same time, what I think this perspective diminishes is that the cost and the benefits are actually connected. That it is through the cost that we actually more fully realize the genuine benefits of what it means to be a Jesus follower. That we like to avoid the cost. We don't want to think about it. Stay away from the things that challenge the way we live, the way we spend our money, the way we do relationships, our habits, all of that. We want to avoid all that stuff, right? But we forget that it is through the cost that actually leads us to the benefits, the fullness of life that Jesus talks about. And so today, to continue our discussion in the way of Jesus, what I want to do is I want to talk about the cost, what it is, what it might look like for you in your life and your faith journey, and why I ultimately believe that the way of Jesus is worth it. To do this, I want us all to kind of go back to the first century and do our best to put ourselves in the shoes of the first century disciples of Jesus. The reason I think this is really important is because I want us to kind of see things from their perspective, okay? They had this guy, he invited them to follow him. We talked about in part 2, it was unprecedented that they would be invited to follow. They were so underqualified to follow. But nonetheless, they're invited to follow. They kind of give up their own life. They start following him, and all these good, fun things start to happen. And we realize the disciples actually have a certain set of expectations. And we would think, if we see it from their perspective, well, their expectation is that he's God, right? He's the Messiah. Like, they begin to believe that this is true. And that is accurate, but there was another set of expectations that they had. To the disciples, they're excited that he's God and the Messiah. That's great. But what they're more excited about was they would probably think to themselves, if this is God, that means he's going to free us from the Romans. Because the Jewish people had been oppressed by the Romans for years. And so, yeah, he's the Messiah, but really, the real benefit here is he's going to free us from the Romans. And so they start to follow him. And, for us today in our own faith journey, we don't have to worry about the Romans, right? But we tend to follow Jesus similarly. We step into it, and it feels great, and it's happy, and it's exciting, and wow, this is amazing. We're excited for all the happy things Jesus is going to bring us in our life, right? And that's where the disciples were. And then things start to take a turn. One day, after following him for a little while, Jesus turns to his guys, and he says, hey, you've been hearing from me. Now I want you to go share this with other people. In fact, I want you to go out into these neighboring communities. Some of these were sketchy places for Jewish people to go. I'm not going to come with you. You're just going to go out in pairs on your own, and you don't even get to take food with you. Just take the sandals on your feet. To which I'd imagine they would probably go, that doesn't sound that great, but okay, I guess we'll try it. Shortly after that, they get news that one of their friends died, John the Baptist. Some of them had been disciples of John the Baptist before, so this was heartbreaking, and John the Baptist was beheaded by King Herod. Well, they weren't expecting that either. And then Jesus has a conversation with them one day, and he turns to them and he says, hey, we've been talking a lot about what I bring, the goodness, the benefits, all that stuff, right? But I just want you to know the Son of Man, who they have come to believe is him, the Messiah, God, right? The Son of Man must actually suffer and be killed. And we don't know what they were thinking at this time, but again, we can imagine that they're probably going, wait, that's not what we expected. Aren't you here to save us? Isn't that how this is going to go? And they come face to face with the cost of following this man. And then Jesus kind of just spells it out for them. Look at what he says. If any of you wants to be my follower, which is slightly insulting because some of them had left their families behind to follow him already, right? And it was an honor, but they gave up a lot. And now he's saying, if anybody of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. And this sounds dramatic, but this is not that crazy of an idea to us. Another translation of this says that you should deny yourself, right? And before we go too far with this, I mean, this is normal for us. We deny ourselves all the time. We attempt to, or we think that we should deny ourselves, right? We deny ourselves when we save money instead of consuming money now. We deny that thing that wants to consume money now. We deny ourselves when we maybe go into the pantry and we see an apple on one side and we see a jar of pickle juice on the other side. Maybe that's just me. You guys insert whatever guilty pleasure snack you have, right? We go with the apple. We deny ourselves to go with the apple, or we think we should. None of us do that naturally. And if you do, I don't know if I believe that you do that naturally. But we're used to this idea of denying ourselves, right? Because there's something in us that kind of goes towards the gravitational pull towards instant gratification, what's comfortable, what is easy, what we think will bring happiness in our life, right? And Jesus is speaking to that thing in us, and he's saying the same is true in following him. That yes, there's these things, your ways of life, your ways of thinking that are just natural for you, but at some point you're going to come to a crossroads in terms of following me. You will come to a point that looks a little like this, where you're faced with a decision between the way of you and the way of Jesus. And this is where it begins to come at a cost, because we have to decide, do we go with our way, or do we deny ourselves, give up our own way, and trust and go with the way of Jesus instead? This can look like a lot of different things in our life. I want to share a few examples with you. Maybe you're not a morning person, but the way of Jesus is experienced by being with him, experiencing or spending time with God. And I believe mornings are one of the best times to do that because you kind of start your day that way. And so your crossroads is very simple. Do I deny myself? Do I get up early and prioritize this or not? It could be that maybe your way of life is just go, 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 never stop going, always busy, always trying to make money, right? Always trying. Time is money. That's how you view things. But the way of Jesus says, slow down. If you go too fast, you'll miss God and you'll miss some of the best things in life. And so do you rest and create margin in your life even when things are crazy or not? Maybe your way, your mental map of the world, your approach to the world has primarily been around maximizing your happiness. But then you learn about the way of Jesus. You discover that life is bigger than just you. There is a kingdom greater than the kingdom that you are building in your life. And so do deny yourself. Invest your time, your energy, your resources in something bigger than yourself. We face these kind of decisions every single day. But this crossroads, it actually comes in much more pivotal moments as well. It could be that you face something in life that is difficult or unexpected, and everything in you wants to numb out or check out or drown it out, to not deal with it. But the way of Jesus challenges you to be honest with yourself, to look in the mirror, to deal with it, regardless of the cost. Could be that you face criticism or failure or ridicule. You disappoint other people. You disappoint yourself, maybe. And everything in you wants to blame them to avoid having to work on you. But the way of Jesus says you're okay. And in fact, the way forward is to take the plank out of your eye before you worry about the speck in their eye. One more example. Could be you go through a circumstance with somebody or a group of people relationally, and it leaves you completely broken. The relationship is broken. They hurt you. They did something to hurt you. Everything in you wants to get revenge or run or shut it out, but then the way of Jesus says, forgive as you have been forgiven. This is where it comes at a cost. And one of the things I've shared before is one of my favorite parts of my job, getting to just be here for a decade plus now and bump into a lot of people and their lives and their stories. One of my favorite parts is when I watch people begin to follow Jesus and their lives transform in a beautiful way. One of the more saddening things that I don't talk about as much is just being here long enough. I've also seen the roller coaster ride of what happens when it gets hard for people. I've experienced this in my own life where I have made mistakes that are not in line with the way of Jesus, and I've seen people do the same as well, where they blow up a friendship, a marriage falls apart. They assume the worst on something and they never have a conversation, and they walk away from community they have built for years, all because the cost is too high. Don't get me wrong. God is a God of redemption and hope, and his mercies and grace are new every single day. But this point at which we come at this crossroads, he gives us free will to choose his way, to choose the way of Jesus, or to choose our own way. And this is where our natural inclination is to choose ours, because this is where it gets hard. That's why Jesus says this next. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. It is almost impossible for us to understand what it was like to hear this for the disciples in the first century. We view crosses in a number of ways. Maybe you view a cross as something positive. Maybe it's irrelevant to you if you're exploring faith, or maybe you view it negatively if you have a bad church experience, perhaps. None of it holds a candle to how they saw a cross back then. To them, a cross was a symbol of death and torture and Roman power. And when they thought of crosses, what they would think about is those people that they knew that got on the wrong side of the Romans and that they were sentenced to execution. They'd have to carry their cross to a point in which they would be nailed to it and they would die. That's what they thought of when they thought of a cross. So this is not expected that Jesus would say this, that he would tell them, hey, actually, to be a genuine follower is to step underneath the very symbol of death and Roman power. And not only to do it once, but then he says do it daily. To do this daily, right? This is what it means to be a true, genuine follower of Jesus. When I read passages like this, and I wrestle with, what does this mean for my life? I often think about a shirt that I own, actually. And a buddy of mine, he owns an e-commerce business, and they sell weightlifting equipment and belts and gear and apparel. And I have a couple of their shirts, and this is one of my favorite shirts. On the front, it says, "Prefer pain." And then on the back, it says, "Comfort is a slow death." And I always feel like I want to say, like, comfort is a slow death. Like, like that kind of voice that I naturally do not have at all. But I like this shirt, and I'm just curious, and I think this shirt really hits different personality groups in the room. Raise your hand if you see a shirt like this, and you're like, yes, I would wear that in a heartbeat. Like, that's me. Okay, now raise your hand if this shirt makes you want to take a nap. Yep, there's a few that are just like, that's me. You couldn't catch me dead wearing that shirt. I like this shirt for a number of reasons. One, it's really ironic that on the back it says, "Comfort is a slow death," because I wear it all the time. It's one of the most comfortable shirts that I own. So I feel like they need to get that right. I don't know. They need to figure something out there. I also think the phrase "prefer pain" is really interesting because it's really an oxymoron, right? Like, none of us inherently prefer pain. In fact, all of us, regardless of our personality type, we are wired to avoid pain. Like, regardless of how tough we are wired to avoid pain. We have that fight or flight thing in our brains to run away from things that are hard, maximize comfort, and ensure survival. And at the same time, all of us, regardless of our personality type, would probably agree that when we go through difficulty or hardship or painful things in our life, there is something inherently good and developing and building about those seasons of our life to lead us to become better people, right? So it lands in a lot of different ways, but this is part of the reason Jesus is saying this to his guys is, he's saying, yes, it's going to cost you. Yes, it's going to be hard, but don't miss, there is something that God wants for you in it. I like how C.S. Lewis, he's a famous, just one of the faith greats of our time, and he went through a lot of painful things in his life. He fought in one of the world wars. He actually says later on in his life that he went to Christianity kicking and screaming, is how he describes it, but he couldn't argue with it. And he's been one of the most influential people for so many people to discover Jesus. And here's what he says about pain. Pain insists upon being attended to. This is that idea that when you have like an open wound on your arm, like that's all you can think about, right? And even more so in our emotional, our mental battles, pain forces you to deal with things, to not stay the same, to grow, to become different. It insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He's there, that's great. God speaks in our conscience. Yes, that's true. He shouts in our pains. This is where he really connects with us. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Jesus says, yes, there are a lot of benefits, but it will cost you and it will be hard, but there is something far greater and better for you in it. I recognize if you're brand new to church or Christianity, this could feel like a really bad pitch for following Jesus. Like just thinking about taking up your cross, preferring pain, like, oh, we're going to suffer, right? Like it's going to be great. But that's where we go. Well, I guess then I'll just believe what I want to believe so I can do what I want to do. And we miss the essence of what he is saying here. Jesus continues. He says, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. This is what we try to do. We try to grip our life as hard as we can, minimize discomfort, maximize ease. We want to be happy, all this stuff. We will lose the very life we are trying to preserve, is what he is saying. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, why Jesus' sake? Because his life, death, and resurrection proved that he was who he claimed to be. He really is the way, the truth, and the life. And he says, if you give up your life for my sake, you follow me, you will save it. You will discover and experience something. You will experience a kingdom far greater than anything you could ever build on your own. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you yourself are lost or destroyed? We can believe what we want to believe, so we can do what we want to do, but I want you to think about this. But what if what we want to do doesn't lead to what we ultimately want? Wouldn't we want to know and choose a different way? And yes, it'll cost you your way, but perhaps it'll lead you to the way, the truth, the life that you were made for. To summarize all of this, the way of Jesus is giving up what you want regardless of the cost. Giving up your own way, denying yourself for what he wants for you. What does God want for you? Like any good father, your heavenly Father, it might not feel like he wants on the surface the things that you want, but I promise you, because I've experienced it in my life and seen it in so many people, desires for you at a deeper level are the things that you most deeply long for. The contentment, the satisfaction, the peace, the rest, the joy, the meaning, the fulfillment, the love, the purpose that you most deeply long for, whether you realize it or not. That is what Jesus wants for you. We see a statement like this, and I think if we just think like math, 2 + 2 = 4, right? We go, this doesn't make any sense. Give up what I want, and I'm going to get what I want, right? Like those two things don't add up. And then it kind of compounds because you hear other statements that Jesus says throughout his ministry, where on one hand he says, if any of you wants to be my follower, give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me, right? Okay. And then you hear this, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and the burden I give you is light. And we see these two things, and if you're anything like me, I mean, I'm black and white. I struggle to live in the gray sometimes, and so I see this, and I'm like, Jesus, is it the cross or is it light? Is it like an IKEA cross? Like it looks heavy, but it's made out of particle board kind of cross? Which is it? I think Jesus looks at us in those wrestling moments, and he goes, yes. Yes, it is both. Both are accurate, because when you step into those seasons of your life, or you make decisions where you implement some practice and it costs you your time and your energy, or you make a decision to go this way or go this way, or you make a decision to pursue some relationship you know that you should reconcile, when you do that, oh my gosh, it comes at a cost. And it's hard and it is difficult. But what we don't see in that moment is by stepping under that and carrying that, we find a God who carries it with us. We find a God who teaches us, who walks with us, who guides us, who leads us, who refines us and loves us. He's not trying to fix you. There's so many things he's just trying to heal in you. And when he does this, we discover a kingdom we were made for, a life that we were made for. It often makes me think of, when I read this passage, makes me think of this moment the disciples have with Jesus, going back to their perspective. I love the show The Chosen and how it kind of depicts the interactions of Jesus and his guys. And if you haven't watched it, or maybe you're exploring Jesus, like it's a great way to just, who is Jesus? What was this guy about? It's a great thing to watch. And in the last season, this was one of the last episodes, and they have this moment, it's depicted in the gospel accounts. And it's this moment where things had been going south. It wasn't what they expected. John died, people were dying, right? They were getting ridiculed, they were getting thrown stones at them for what Jesus was saying. And Jesus stands in front of Jerusalem. And this is kind of the beginning of the end of his ministry, because it's where he's going to go get killed here pretty soon. And he looks at his guys and he says this statement, are you also going to leave? Now that you know it comes at a cost, are you going to go as well? And then we see the guys in response, the camera angle kind of turns. And I just think, buff Peter standing there in the middle. I just think it's so hilarious. He's so buff, he walks like this in the series. Buff Peter looks at Jesus, he looks at his guys, and he says, Lord, to whom would we go? It's like him saying, Jesus, we know who you are, we've seen too much. You have the words of eternal life. Yes, it's going to come at a cost. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, your way is difficult. But you are the way, the truth, and the life, and so we just want what you want for us. This is the disciples' moment, and they have many more moments like this. But I just want to get close to wrapping up our time and turn it around to you and ask you, in your faith journey, not talking about somebody else's faith journey or the person who brought you, invited you, whatever, in your faith journey, let me ask you, as you think about Jesus, when it comes at a cost, whose way will you follow? This is really important. I want you to pay attention here. This is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it comes at a cost. Because it will come at a cost eventually. And when that happens, whose way will you follow? One of the things I think we forget a lot is we know Jesus wants something good for us because he knows what we all come to discover later on in life is that often with these decisions, these crossroads, there is a cost now. There is a cost now, but it is intended to save us from a greater cost later. That yes, living life, waking up each day, implementing some practice, spending time with God, there's a cost to that. But living with anxiety and wrestling with what direction you go in life without him, that's a far harder life to choose. Yes, there is a cost to raising your hand and saying, I need help. My marriage isn't going well. I'm struggling financially. That takes a lot of humility and swallowing your pride to do something like that. That comes at a great cost. But the harder cost later is having gone through life and having not realized your blind spots. And then you look at your relationships broken, a divorce that perhaps happened, and you wish you would have done something differently, right? This is why Jesus wants this for us, because we face a decision. Should we stay? Should we go? What are we going to do? And we want to go our way, the path of least resistance, right? And so we want to look at that cost now, but we forget the cost later. And we all want to look back on our life and say that we chose the way of Jesus. In those moments, because he is the way, the truth, and the life, to be able to look back and say, I stepped into a life that God made me for. I want to end our time just by sharing a story of somebody in my life. As I was working through this content in this series, I couldn't help but continue to think about them. And a friend of mine, really successful, influential guy, and he had been a part of this company for years. And at some point, he got promoted in the company. And he finds himself working on this project that had existed for a while. And as he starts to peel back layer and layer and layer of this project, he finds something out that he didn't know. And he'd been a part of this company for a long time. But he discovers that this company had actually, through this project, been lying to customers, breaking terms of agreement, and essentially just stealing money from people. And so this guy was a follower of Jesus for a really long time. And when I was talking to him about it, he said, it wasn't that I didn't know what I wasn't going to do. Like, I wasn't going to turn the other, I knew I wasn't going to turn the other way. I knew I couldn't just look away from this. Like, I had to do something. He said, I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know what it was going to cost me to do something about this. And so he describes, the next couple of days praying and wrestling with this. He ends up calling up the CEO of the company. And he tells them what he found. And then what he discovers is that leadership knew about it. They've been keeping quiet about it. And he is told, if you are to do something about it, it's going to be suicide for the company. And so he's left in this really hard place. Because again, he doesn't want to be part of this. He wants this to stop. But he also needs a job, provide for his family. He has a team. He'd been a part of this company for years, so he felt very stuck. And so he ends up calling up the leadership again, and he says, hey, I'd like to resign, but I'd like severance to help, cover expenses, my family. And what he's told in return is, okay, you can resign, but we're only going to finish the kind of pay period in right now, which was the next couple of days, basically. And so he leaves the company, and he thinks it's over. And then shortly after that, he finds out that more people came forward and found out what was going on, and they said, this is not okay. And he gets a call to go testify in court because there's big companies going at each other. There's millions of dollars involved. And so he has to lawyer up to protect himself and his family and make sure he doesn't get drugged too far into this. And then finally, he's brought to testify in court. The company he was a part of ends up losing. In a lot of aspects, it begins to fall apart. And that's really the end of the story. But I share it because, I was talking to him this week. I just called him up. I said, hey, can I share this? And what would you say about this? And it was interesting because I remember sitting with him on his patio as he was going through this. And we were just talking about life. And, Yes, there was a cost of his job and the severance and how is he going to provide for his family. Now there's lawyer fees involved. He's got to testify, all of that. And I saw the other cost that was unseen, that there was this emotional, mental, spiritual weight that he was dealing with throughout the whole thing. So I called him and I just said, hey, I mean, you chose the way of Jesus in this and it cost you a lot. Like, what would you say about it? And I'll just read what he said because he said it way better than I could. He said, in the short term, it cost me a ton. But God isn't as concerned with all of those things that I'm so concerned with in the short term. He said, God just asks me to be faithful, to follow. And then this was the best part. God bless the obedience in my life with where my family and career are today by making that situation right. I share that story. And this might be a bigger example than some of the things we might be facing in our life, but I share it because so often we tend to look at what this is going to cost me now that we forget what God can do on the other side of our faithfulness and our willingness just to take a step and follow. This is why I think the Lord's Prayer, it says, just give me today my daily bread. I don't know what's going to come tomorrow, but just, would you help me just take this step today, regardless of the cost, and follow you? I believe God has something significant for us in that if we're willing to do it. Because the way of Jesus is giving up what you want regardless of the cost for what he wants for you. And I believe whether that is now, whether that's later in life, whether it's something big or small, I believe if you are willing to accept the cost, that God does have something for you in it. But my question is, when it comes at a cost, whose way will you follow? Will you follow the way of Jesus? And if you do, I think you'll find a life that you were made for. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you so much just for your grace, your goodness. Thank you that we can look back in history and just learn from this text. And Father, our tendency, we know it, is just to gravitate towards what feels good, what feels right, and we diminish the hard stuff. But God, we just want to come before you today and invite you into our life with whatever we're carrying, whatever we're facing. We ask you to be with us in it. You'd carry it with us. Help us take one step after the other in following you, following your way. And God, one day we pray, whether it's in this life or on the other side of heaven, that we'd get to see the amazing things you do in our life, through us, in your kingdom, through our obedience and willingness to follow you. God, we love you, we need you, we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, we'll see you next week as we wrap up the series with part 5. Thanks so much.